Hello and welcome to The Pledge. This week, the legendary pop star Kylie Minogue turned 50, though you wouldn't guess it from the fantastic photo she posted to mark the occasion. It certainly set a high bar for anyone celebrating being another year wiser. On which note, June, here's your guitar. There's a camera over there.
Yeah.
Let's get cracking.
OK. Yeah.
I'd pay good money for this.
How's that work? How's that looking?
Coming up on the programme, the birthday girl says it's time to ban private schools. Carol argues millennials have got it too easy. Greg thinks we need to change the rules on referendums. And Nick says we shouldn't be lying to our kids about history. Poor Theresa May. Her Irish chickens really are coming home to roost. Ireland voting yes to repeal the 8th Amendment on abortion lifted the stone on her deal with the hardline Conservative Democratic Unionist Party, and we all saw the ugly murk underneath. Northern Ireland is the only place in the UK where women don't have access to legal abortion. And the DUP has promised to block any future reforms. This leaves Mrs May open to accusations from all sides that she's letting down women simply to stay in office. Number 10 says it's a devolved issue, but there's no functioning government installment to change the law on abortion or anything else. So what does the PM do as a self-identifying feminist? Surely back women's right to choose in all parts of the UK. Like the abortion debate, politics is all about choices. I think we all know which one St. Theresa will go for.
Rachel, I think, yeah, we do know which one St. Theresa will go for, and it's not the right one. I have no pity for her, because if this was always going to be an issue, at some point this was going to come back on the table where Ireland is concerned. And the minute you make a deal with the DUP, you know what they are, you know what they stand for. This is what you get. So I have no pity for her. And I think if she was smart, actually, what she should do is use this issue to draw a line between her and the DUP and say, when it comes to certain issues in terms of what's right where women are concerned, this is where we stand as the Conservative Party.
All right, I think this is the moment maybe to hear how really hardline the DUP is being on abortion. Chairman of the party, Lord Morrow, says if Theresa May allowed the Tory party to have a free vote on this, then she would have to accept the consequences. I think it is something she would regret, but it is not something I think she has any intention of doing. Why would she risk losing the support of the DUP? She would not be foolish enough to do that. That's a direct threat, isn't it, Nick?
Look, I'm not here for a standard bearer for the DUP, but June, rarely, and it's your birthday, so I'll draw the line, but rarely have I heard such ill-informed bunkum in my entire life. This is purely and utterly politically...
I'm glad you drew the line.
Yes, I did. That's because it was a birthday, so I was polite. This is purely and utterly politically motivated. Let's have a quick read of what James Cleverly, who is one of the vice-chairmen of the Conservative Party, said. The attacks on Theresa May about abortion in Northern Ireland from Labour voices have little to do with women's right to choose and everything to do with opportunistic party political game playing.
Nick, can we just hear from Sarah Wollaston? On her own side, 100 Tory MPs have also signed a motion saying that she should move on abortion rights for women in Northern Ireland. Let's hear it.
I think, at the very least, the people in Northern Ireland deserve a referendum to be able to express their view on this, because it's clear from the vote in the Republic that times are changing, opinions are changing, and it's time for, I would say, for women in the north of Ireland to have the same access to safe legal termination as elsewhere on the island of Ireland, as well as in the United Kingdom.
I mean, you can't pretend that people are using this as a wedge issue simply in order to destabilise Theresa May. This is a moral issue.
It's a moral issue.
June, you talk about drawing a line. You will draw a line that could probably bring back the Troubles, because we have something, I know it's not sitting at the moment, but we have something that is called the democratically elected Northern Irish Assembly, which as recently as February 2016, all but a little over 2 years ago, debated this and found to keep it as it is currently. Draw a line. If you have central government in Westminster imposing on Northern Ireland, can you imagine what that bring about? Now, is this a ridiculous situation? Of course it is, that it's the only place. It's utterly absurd.
Nick,
but you can't have the heavy hand of...
No, but
really can't.
no, but Nick, at some point, it's about what's the right thing to do
Okay,
as well.
we understand what you say, but Stormont hasn't sat for 17 months. The Supreme Court... What if, during the absence of government in Northern Ireland, the Supreme Court rules, I'll put this to Carol, that women should have access to abortion in the province?
Before I answer that, what I want to say is you're smart enough to know that Mrs May is currently between a rock and a hard place. You know that in the coming weeks, she has a number of...
But that was always going to happen.
Hang on a sec. In the coming weeks, she's got a number of votes coming up on the EU withdrawal bill. She's got to overturn 15 defeats inflicted by the House of Lords. She cannot hack the DUP off right. And you know that. It's political expediency. You know, she might be a feminist, but she's Prime Minister first, and she has to do what's required for this country. And I cannot imagine what it must be like as a woman living in Ireland. In the world that we inhabit now, I cannot imagine being in a situation where if you're raped by a stranger, by a member of your own family, you have to give birth to that baby. It's hideous and it is against women's human rights. But what I'm just sad about is all the people now who are shouting about this, Labour in particular, why weren't they shouting about this a year ago? Because they didn't take a referendum in the Republic to make them concerned about this. They should have been concerned about this in the past, however many years.
People did point out when Theresa May got into bed with the DUP.
But she had to. She had no chance. She mistakenly called an election.
On gay rights, on many things.
But she mistakenly called an election. She lost a majority, so she had to get it from somewhere else. This is political expediency. It's the same kind of expediency that the Labour Party are currently using because they don't want her to use those DUP votes. They want to vote her down in the Commons, so that's why they're talking out now.
What happens when it becomes an open vote? I mean, abortion has always been a free vote in the House of Commons. What happens if she loses? Which she probably will. I mean, if you actually look at who's lining up, she probably will if it comes to that. I mean, what you're going to get to the bizarre position now is, for years you've had people from the Republic coming to Britain to get abortions, women coming in. Now you're going to get people from Northern Ireland going to the South.
Greg, it has to be a devolved issue. You have to respect... Either you respect democracy, and the Assembly debated this just over 2 years ago, or you allow human rights laws, and I agree with what all you women are saying, but you allow human rights laws to trump democracy. That's what you're saying.
But you have no government. But you have no devolved government in the North. And you're not likely to in the near future. And Sinn Féin are going to make this one of the issues of getting back into government.
Convention dictates, Greg, and I'm sure you all know this, that the Westminster shouldn't come in on devolved issues, and this is one of the devolved issues.
But hang on, there's no devolved government. So therefore, at some stage, Westminster the government in the UK has to rule Northern Ireland.
It doesn't have to rule on this now. This issue has been hanging around for a lot of years. They could have ruled on it a long time ago. They've chosen now because they know it's a way to destabilise Theresa May. Yes, this is an important issue, but this is a way to destabilise Theresa May.
The Republic has made a different choice on this issue. That's why it's back on the table.
But it should have always been on the table.
But then who stands up for the rights of women in Northern Ireland, if not our own Prime Minister?
You're getting... Carol is agreeing. Carol and I both agree.
No,
it is absurd. What we are saying is, respectfully, there is a process. You have to... Otherwise, the troubles you could be storing up, June, in Northern Ireland...
No, what we're saying is Theresa May has to do the right thing and not just think about her own political career. No, that's not what we're saying.
Because what we should be doing... I take Greg's point. We should be working and trying to get the Assembly to say... I think it's 17 months, isn't it? They've been out, something like that. We should be working and getting... You can't take decisions... Well, can you imagine as and when they come back and something as contentious as abortion wasn't even...
Surely Sarah Wilson's got it right. You should now have a referendum in Northern Ireland. Because that would then say it's the decision of the people as opposed to the decision of government.
That would meet the evolution question.
Yeah.
Can I move it on a bit? I think we all understand that democracy has to sort of trump feminism because it's bigger than all of us. But do you think there's a slight anomaly here in the position? Do you think the DUP is having its cake and eating it? Because they're not allowing any differentiation between Northern Ireland and the UK when it comes to Brexit, but they want full differentiation when it comes to women in Northern Ireland's rights on abortion and the rest of the UK when it comes to...
Well, you're looking at me, I mean, I'll just say, because I sense June wants to come in.
There is a difference here, isn't there? And the DUP looks pretty shonky.
Look, I said right at the start, I am not a standard bearer for the DUP. Many of their views I find positively abhorrent. Most of their views I can't really get my head around. So, no, this empowering... But I just come back, I won't sound like a broken record here. We have to respect the democratic process.
So we paid £1 billion to be held hostage, basically.
For women not to have access.
It's political expediency, and it's a sad story,
Rachel,
but it's
can
true.
I just bring in a clip of Shami Chakrabarti on Radio 4?
I never get enough of Shami.
We're calling on Mrs May, a self-identifying feminist, to negotiate with the parties in in Northern Ireland and then to legislate without further delay. You can't have democracy without fundamental human rights, and the women of Northern Ireland have suffered for long enough.
Hear, hear. Got nothing else to say on that.
Well, you're obviously on the same side as Shami Chakrabarti, who, of course, it is interesting that sometimes, and I don't want to rain on Greg's parade for later, but while you want to respect the democratic process that we've seen in Ireland as regards the vote of abortion, there was a vote we had in Britain a couple of years ago, I don't think I need to say any more, where folks such as Shami Chakrabarti spend morning, noon and night...
different, Nick.
Because they're both democratic.
Perhaps if Shami Chakrabarti
they knew what they were voting for.
They
were voting for a specific amendment of a written constitution that's owned by the people.
One referendum's good, and one referendum can be ignored.
Nobody knew what Brexit, what they were voting for in the 2016.
Debate to an end because it's me next. So, a bastion of white middle-class southern privilege. That's how MP David Lammy described Oxford University, after figures showed it's still struggling to admit more BAME and state school students. As someone who's helping the university with their diversity drive, I welcome Lammy's criticisms, but I think he's missing the wider issue of our two-tier education system and the fact that in Britain, unfortunately, you get the education your parents can afford to pay for. We divide our children by class, allowing some parents to purchase a ticket on the fast train to affluence via privately funded schools, stopping at any of Britain's top universities. For parents who can't afford to buy a home in the catchment area of a good state school, their kids muddle through an overstretched, underfunded, comprehensive system where only the most exceptional students are able to get a seat at the table for top jobs. I think it's time to put an end to our private school system altogether. We need our schools to be a microcosm of society. That's how we begin to level the playing field.
You're always so fashionable, and you're going to have to wear a North Korean boiler suit, because this is the policy, and I just don't think it'll suit you. This is the policy. It's called choice. Now, I know you have to be well remunerated. You talk about an overstretched and underfunded comprehensive... There's something called grammar schools, of which there aren't enough, and we've debated that before.
Anyway, so let's not
but I do think it's part. But let's just quickly, without hitting you with too many statistics,
I'd
like just to show, clearly, private schools work. And let me show. Remember, just
We know that. That's my point.
Hold on 1 second, June's our point. Remember, June's so wrong. Remember that just 7% of children attend private schools, yet 70% of High Court judges attended private schools. 54%, hold on, of FTSE 100 chief executives.
I don't need to say anything else.
Attended private schools, and a fraction over half, 51%, of medics attended private schools. And by a rough calculation, 40% of today's pledge panel attended private schools.
That's why we need to scrap them. Thank you.
They work. People like them. If they're fortunate enough to be rich, let's bring the comprehensive system up and let's allow parents choice.
OK, no.
June,
and let you do your bit, then I'll let you all say your bit.
Which is what a good education gives kids. It's about giving young people more access to privilege. It's not about taking it away from the ones who already had it.
That's not what I'm saying.
You must have... No. But we have a very complex class system in this country. I know for...
where it begins
OK, but let me just say that the gap between the rich and the poor is ever widening in this country. And what will happen if you abolish all private schools is that the rich will create an elite sector where they move into areas, they pay premium prices for big houses, and we're doing it now. But also, the point that I do agree with you, you can't just chuck a few Oxbridge places at disadvantaged kids. It starts much earlier than that. And I think what disadvantaged kids do not get, and I think the assault on disadvantaged kids is built into the fabric of our society right now. It's going to be hard to shoot. But what those kids don't have, that middle-class kids and kids of rich parents, is there's nowhere for them to get inspiration. There's no one to tell them what they can do, what they can become, where they can go. And, I come from a family... I failed in the education system. I went to secondary school, failed the 11+. My prospects were as a clerk in an office. Save but for one teacher in my secondary school, who was the first person in my life who told me I could be anything, do anything. My parents told me that people like us didn't get to be journalists.
Can I say...
And that's what's happening.
Can I say one thing?
They were right in one way when I look at you.
I was going to say that, yes.
Can I say one thing, Greg, and then I'll bring you in? So the reason why I think we need to look at Rachel's face. The reason I think we need to get rid of private schools altogether is for a number of reasons. First of all, I'll take my own story. So I went to a normal state school. But what happened in my state school was my area was becoming gentrified as I was growing up. So therefore you had a sort of lots of middle-class do-gooders, people like yourself, Greg, who sent their kids to my school. As a result, our PTA was fantastic. And so we had great corporate links. So I was able to get work experience at the age of 16, which changed my life. And what I'm saying is, if all kids are in the same schools, I tell you what, the standard is raised for everybody.
Comprehensive systems are based...
The standard is raised for everyone.
Comprehensives are based on the assumption that all kids' needs are the same.
Join in this debate.
Sorry,
carry just on. The two of you.
No, please.
Oh.
Right.
Fine.
I think, first of all, 58% of admissions to Oxford are from kids from state schools, which means 42% come from private schools, where only 7% of the population go.
Yeah.
Now, if you actually get into this and look at it in detail, certain public schools have relationships with certain colleges, which means if you go to that school, you go to that university. It's a pipeline. It goes straight through. And it is not... You don't have to be that clever. No. Because you're at that school and you go through that. The idea that Oxbridge takes only the cleverest isn't true. It's just not true, because there's all sorts of clever kids who don't get anywhere near it because they didn't go to the right school.
Totally.
Now, your idea that you're going to ban private schools, well, it's not going to happen.
Well, I know.
It's not going to happen.
I know it's not going to happen, but I'm saying I think it should happen.
What we could start off by doing is ending the tax breaks for public schools, because they get quite significant tax breaks. Don't give them the tax breaks. But you're right, we've got to get more kids, we've got to put more pressure on places like Oxford and say, look, it's not acceptable to you to have this relationship with that school and all these kids come from there.
And I'm going to bring in David Lammy's grab, and then I'll comment on what Oxford are actually doing. So let's have a look at what David had to say.
What we're seeing is entrenched privilege at Oxford and Cambridge. What we're seeing is some tutors recruiting in their own image, the same schools year after year, sending kids to Oxford and Cambridge, and even if you get the grades, in other parts of the country being squeezed out. It's unacceptable, it's poor practice, and they know it.
And what I will say in Oxford's defence, slightly, is what they've done is they've actually created a diversity and inclusion department. And the issue is there isn't enough of a pipeline between those universities and our state school systems. What you're saying is true in the way that with the private school system, it's just clear. So what I'm saying is that if all the kids are educated together, and actually, if in adult life we want people to be able to integrate, it needs to start earlier.
But also they have an interview...
Sorry, Rachel.
Sorry,
right, yeah,
they have an interview. They have an interview system, which means it's not just based upon getting so many starred A's. They have an interview system, and the interview system is inevitably biased in favour of the more confident kids.
Well, clearly Oxbridge will take anybody. Rachel Johnson.
Rachel.
Hands up on this panel who went to Oxbridge.
You did.
Well, that's because obviously my school had a relationship with my college, didn't it? I don't know.
And
I think it was. I still think it was a mistake, actually.
Both of you.
But June, I mean, the problem is that obviously if we were remaking the education system from scratch, we wouldn't start where we are now. Because if you look at France, Germany, even America, only the thick kids go to posh private schools.
Well, much the same here if you look at you.
You mean? And everyone else that goes to the lycée or the gymnasium or whatever they're called, and it's a much more level playing field. And I long, and I wish that we could have done that here.
But at some point,
we can't. So we've got to make it.
So what are you suggesting?
What am I suggesting?
Yeah.
I mean, I've said two, but I mean, I realise it's a throwaway comment that we should get rid of the private schools. But you know what? I've used them myself.
We should have more
I've used them myself.
More grammar schools.
We should have more private schools. That would make the state up their game.
Nick is right, which is that we have to bring up the state system to match, to equal the private system, and then parents would fall on it with like ravening beasts.
But still, we'll always have that problem, because you will always have the problem whereby the private schools with the wealthiest kids have the clear pipeline. And I think actually when everybody's being educated together, even the way the wealthy kids view the world is different. And I think that's really important. If these are the people we're expecting to lead us and they've never actually integrated and
I give you Jacob Rees-Mogg.
There you go. I mean, he would be a very different human being had he grown up with much more diversity.
He's a very nice man.
Shouldn't we put more pressure Shouldn't governments put more pressure on Oxbridge, the Oxford
Why
to take more kids from
Why
Oxford?
demonise Oxbridge? It's all Russell Group.
It's not all Russell Group. York, where I was Chancellor, had 80-odd% from state schools. Certain schools that have relationships, certain universities that in particular have relationships with certain schools, certain private schools.
OK. It's me now. I can't read that with my glasses on. OK. This week, actress Sheila Hancock made the shock announcement that she's leaving the majority of her wealth not to her 2 grown-up daughters, but to a charity she and her late husband John Thaw set up to help disadvantaged kids. Sheila says leaving wealth to your kids is the worst thing you can do, saying that to, quote, earn a living is a good incentive to force yourself off your bottom. She was slated on social media as a bitter, cruel, nasty old woman who wasn't doing her duty as a parent in ensuring her kids have a better life than she did. But Sheila's not alone. Sting, Nigella Lawson, even billionaires Warren Buffett and Bill Gates say they won't be leaving all of their cash to their kids because they want to bestow a sense of responsibility and a work ethic. Aren't they right? Don't millennials have a sense of entitlement in believing everything their parents have should automatically be theirs? Shouldn't kids have to learn independence? Or is it mum and dad's job just to keep giving their kids everything, even when they're grown-ups?
So I assume that when the government, as is the Conservative Party policy, wants to increase the amount you can inherit without paying any tax, you don't agree with that?
Haven't thought about it.
Well, it's exactly what you're arguing. It says, look, less of the money is going to go to the children. In this case, it's going to go in taxation and help to fund other things in our society. But, I mean, that's the question.
No, the question is, should kids whose parents are wealthy automatically inherit everything? Because Nigella Lawson says she didn't want her kids to know what financial security meant because she says not having to work ruins people. And I think she's right.
I don't disagree with you, except if you're brought up in a financially stable environment where actually there's a bit of money around on them, you're inevitably going to have an easier life.
You are.
Inevitably, because you don't have that pressure. You don't have that pressure that comes in very poor households.
But is that pressure not a good thing? I think kids who grew up in wealthy households, I think it's different if you're from a working class household where your parents may leave you a house and a few grand, maybe. That's not going to ruin your life. But I think the kids of much richer people who might be left multi-millions, what is there left to strive for?
How much is too much, Carol?
It's a tough one, that. But I think, people like... no, I don't think £1 million would stop you working. I think if your parents are someone like Stig, fortune 180 million, if you're Nigella, I don't know what hers is, but it's multi-millions. I think if kids get left all of that, there's no incentive to strive anymore. There's no incentive for ambition. Sheila Hancock has not said she's not leaving any of her money to her kids. What she's saying is she's not leaving the VAT. Let me just finish this one thing. And what she is leaving this money to is the charity she set up with John Thaw, which is for disadvantaged kids who want to act but don't have any money. Isn't it better to leave vast fortunes, to the legacy being that you change the world for young people, rather than just giving a handful of young people multi-millions, and it stifles ambition?
I like your quote of Warren Buffett, who I noticed is actually only leaving his kids $2 billion each. After that, they've got to struggle.
He has got 65 billion.
Wow.
But after that, they've got to struggle. But I fundamentally agree with you. I think that actually, I'm not sure... It depends how you bring your kids up. Well, if you've got money.
And you rightly say it also depends on the inheritance tax framework and probate and all those things. You can't just decide how much your kids are getting. Because actually the state could decide.
No, but you
remember the old days.
You can give a lot of money to charities that then is not taxed.
Exactly.
So you could say, half my income, half my total wealth is going to go to this charity.
Incredibly small percentage of people, though, don't you? These super... I mean, I'm interested in some figures here. I know this isn't necessarily from wills and inheritance. The average parental contribution for home buyers this year will be £18,000, down from £21,600. Now, there are very, very few people who could necessarily just write those cheques for each kid as 18 grand. There are even fewer that kick into that bracket. We're talking about incredible... And by the way, my kids get the lot. Because why else am I racing around on radio stations, television stations, writing newspaper columns?
Too. They said exactly that. They said, why aren't you working just for your kids?
Can I answer Nick's question?
Yes,
why else? He does it because he enjoys it.
I do enjoy it.
It's absolutely nothing to do with what you give your kids.
They might be watching.
Right.
Can I just add to it? So, a good example would be if you look at the Forbes rich list. So, I think something like 60 or 70% of the top 10 are self-made.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that the majority of that group were middle class. So their parents were educated, university educated,
yeah.
and had an income over 150,000. And it seems like that's what you need for a child to be able to get extreme levels of success. So whereby they're not from a family where they're struggling, but there's also something to work for.
But do you not believe, June? Do you not...
No, but what I would say is, in the current climate, where social mobility is regressing, where actually it's so hard for young people to get on the property ladder, actually your inheritance is probably the only way you're going to be able to buy a house
When you're 19 or 20, you're probably not going to try and get in the property. You're probably going to rent. And I think there's a lot of millennials now.
When
I was 19, 20, I was earning a pittance as a junior reporter, but I still left home, and I lived in a grotty bedsit, and I ate baked beans out of a can. I had no money. But I think it's a rite of passage. I think all kids should learn independence in that way.
Property price inflation and the earnings inflation have decoupled so much that you have to, what is it, 7 times your income in order to get your first
Can
house?
I just bring in a grab from Nigel Wilson, who is the CEO of Legal & General?
It's a product of 30 years of policy failure in the housing market, and that's the problem is. And we haven't really got any concrete solutions at the moment, and therefore we need to resolve the housing supply problem. And instead of cheering when house prices, inflation is 5% or 7% or 10%, we should recognise that that's not a good thing for the economy. It's terrible for the younger generations.
Yeah.
I think that's the point. I mean,
that's the point.
And if you don't have... I mean, so we talk about bank of mum and dad.
Yeah.
If your mum and dad have never had any money and haven't got their own house, you are never going to inherit vast sums of money. And you're making this divide. Now, he's right. What do you do about it? Well, the only thing you do about it, you've got to make housing cheaper. How do you make housing cheaper? You've got to build.
Housing cheaper.
You can if you build an awful lot of it, and you stop overseas people from overseas.
It doesn't necessarily work there, because everyone wants to live in London. And if I've got this problem on my plate right now. I've got kids in my 20s who are all renting. Do I sell my house? Do I downsize to cash out and give them a handout? What do you think, Carol? Do I?
No, I don't.
Your view is I don't.
Absolutely, I think you do not. Your kids have had a fantastic education. They should be making their own way.
Whatever their education.
It's not to say you shouldn't help them. You know, Sheila Hancock was not saying
average house price in London. Do you know what it is?
It's a daft argument. When you're 20, you're not going to be buying your own house when you're 20. But I think a lot of millennials now. No, let me finish. A lot of millennials now. The number of them living at home has increased by to 26%. No, because you're not buying a house. I say it again, you're not buying a house at 20, you're renting a house at 20.
But now
and a lot of kids choose not to do that.
Buy a house at 30. See, when we were starting out, there was a clear route to progression in the sense that you knew you were renting at 19, 20 and so on, but actually by the time you were 25 to 30, you would have been able to save enough for a deposit to buy a house. That's not there anymore. I
know it's not there anymore.
The only opportunity for even somebody like Rachel's kids is for her to help them.
I'm not saying parents shouldn't help their kids. That's not what I said in the start. Sheila Hancock is not saying that. I'm absolutely sure she has helped her kids all of their lives.
Carol, are you? There's an implication in what you're saying, which is that somehow it's their fault.
No, it's not. You're just saying that to have a
somehow it's
at all.
So if you're saying it's not their fault, then you're going to have to say, well, we're going to have to find a way to help the kids who don't have parents who can help them.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is kids should be taught about how to be independent, and I'm not entirely sure the nation of millennials now are as independent and as driven as young people of the same age were 30 years ago.
So you are being critical of them in some ways, that they're not driven.
No, I'm being critical of their parents.
You're being critical of the parents. Yeah. But hang on, if you come from parents who have no money, who don't own a house, let me tell you, the incentive is exactly the same as it was 30 years ago. You're not going to get anything from them. Therefore, you've got to find your own way.
Yeah, you have.
But it's very tough.
But it's much more expensive
to
do that
What's wrong
now.
with tough, for goodness sake? Are you saying that kids shouldn't be exposed to tough?
I'm saying that if you've got to find the house prices in many cities now, not all.
You keep on talking. I'm not talking about kids buying houses. I'm talking about kids leaving home at 20 to go and rent a house or a flat.
But you also see that although unemployment is low and employment is high, actually wages haven't gone up.
No.
Actually, if anything, they've gone down. You and I came from an era when, you know, it was inevitable that if you got a better job, you got more money, you got more money. That's not the case anymore.
So are you of the belief that you're quite a rich man, Greg? Are you going to leave all your cash to your kids?
No.
Great. How much am I getting?
Yeah. So, I'm going to leave them to Nick's kids because I don't think he's going to have it.
If you're not leaving all the cash, why aren't you?
Why aren't I? Because the money that I make today, I give quite a lot away to various things that I support, and I shall support them when I go.
You're actually backing my argument. That's exactly what I'm saying.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Oh,
I'm not disagreeing with that.
Didn't sound like you did.
All I'm saying is you seem to be implying that it's their fault.
I'm saying to give kids a sense of independence, to make them financially responsible, to give them a work ethic. Life has to be tough sometimes.
I want to know, are you selling your house?
No.
Right.
Because I'd like to buy yours.
You're
going to great house, you stay there.
Right, it's me up after the break, and I'm arguing that we need more people to vote for the big decisions. I was in Ireland at the weekend and witnessed the resounding vote in favour of liberalising their abortion laws. The size of the majority for change, 66% to 34%, has almost certainly put paid to the current restrictions on abortion in Ireland forever, particularly because the young voted 87% in favour of change. In contrast, the problem with the Brexit vote in Britain is that the majority in favour of leaving the EU was too small. Just 52% to 48%. This means that instead of a referendum sorting out an issue forever, as in Ireland, we've got the opposite in Britain. And with the young so disproportionately in favour of Remain, while older people back Leave, the issue of the EU is not sorted at all. And remember, time is on the side of the young. I don't like referendums much, but if we are to have them in the future, then we should at least ensure that change requires a minimum of, say, 60% support. That way, the losers are more likely to accept the result.
Greg, it sounds like you want to set the bar so high that common, old, uneducated people don't get a chance to change government policy. And,
I didn't call them common, old, uneducated
no, but
people.
That sounds
I called them older people, which they overwhelmingly were.
That's the implication. And Brexit isn't not being settled because there was a 4% difference. Brexit isn't being settled because of a bunch of elitist businessmen and politicians who think they know better than the British people. That's why. But let me just point out, you mentioned the 4%. 4% represents 1.269 million people. That's a lot of people, that 4%. But you're talking about if the number was big enough, would it make a difference? Let's look at the Scottish referendum. Back in 2014, that was won by 55 to 45. That's 10%. Recent polls say there's now a swing a bigger swing to stay in the UK of 12%. So why, in which case, if using your argument, is the SNP now banging on about a second referendum when more people want to stay in the UK now than they did before?
Because
no number will be big enough.
Because they're perfectly entitled to bang on about it. That's politically what they stand for.
It's not what the people want.
No, but then if there is another second referendum, I hope it is a number as big as 60-odd%.
No number will ever be big enough. No number will ever be big enough.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you were in Ireland, as I was at the weekend, where if you went around the streets of the bit of Cork that I was in, you would have thought, this is quite close. So the number of placards up against...
Scottish referendum was the same.
Were everywhere. And yet, the result was overwhelming. And what you saw, what was interesting, was the number of young people who were flying home, who were at university, who were flying home to say, the island has changed. Now, all I'm saying is, what you've now got is a situation, and everybody I talked to, even those who were against the result, said, it's done. This is over now. And it seems to me that's not what we've got with Brexit. And I'm not making the argument for or against Brexit. All I'm saying is, look, we needed a bigger majority if you want to get it settled for life.
Winning is winning in this story. But let me say one thing and then I'll yield. Let me say one thing and then I will yield. I forgot what it was now.
Okay. Can I bring in a quote from Nigel Farage? This is a quote from May 2016. In a 50-48 referendum, this would be unfinished business by a long way. If the Remain campaign win 2/3 to 1/3, that ends it. Funny how that's no longer the case.
You feel strongly enough about an issue, no number's ever going to end.
No, I'm not arguing. This is not an argument about Brexit. This is saying
you brought Brexit.
No, only to say you need a big enough majority if you want to put these things to bed.
But Greg, my point is, here is Nigel Farage, basically more or less saying what you're saying. And then, when it goes his way, this no longer stands.
But the Scots
so I bet you, Carol, this is where you'd be on
The
this.
Scots had a big enough majority, and it hasn't ended the issue.
Greg, do I take it that the magical number is 60% from what you're saying?
I'm suggesting 60%, but there's a number somewhere that says this is overwhelming.
Suppose, God forbid, George Soros and everyone else has their way, and we have another Brexit referendum. Please God, we doesn't have. If it came as say 55 plays 45 to Remain, you'd want to go again.
Well, it's about change. No, it's about change. At the moment,
don't be a politician.
At the moment, we are in the EU, but I don't think 55-45 will be enough to end the debate, and that's the problem.
So you'd want to be? It'd have to be 60 plays 40.
I think, yeah, you'd need that.
You're never going to get it.
It was quite interesting. There's a quote from Theresa May at the weekend which said, "The Irish referendum was an impressive show of democracy which delivered a clear result." Well, Brexit didn't do that.
Exactly.
And when she came and said Brexit means Brexit, actually, it didn't deliver a clear result. And that's the problem. And particularly because the young, in Ireland, the young overwhelmingly voted out. Right? The young in this country didn't.
Yeah, they did. 65%. 65%.
Can we let someone else have a go, Carol?
Yeah, as everybody knows, I'm completely, appalled by the result of the Brexit referendum. But we can't now say, we didn't like the result, let's have another one, because the evidence shows that the problem with the e-referendum was holding it at all, because prior to June 2016, the issue had very, very little saliency outside some zealots in the Tory party who banged on and banged on and banged on. So David Cameron announced that we were going to have a referendum in 2013. We had it in 2016. It was predicated on the Tories having a majority. Cameron thought he was going to get off the hook because he was in coalition. Then he got his majority in 2015. He had to hold the referendum. And we've been obsessed about Brexit ever since. It was having the referendum that had created the enormous drama around the EU that had never heretofore existed in this country.
And can I just
say we can't just say we've got to have another referendum to sort the matter out, because it will not.
You can't change the rules of most golf clubs or anything like it, or most associations, if you haven't got 60% or 66%.
I agree with you on a but we need, if we're going to have another referendum,
that's what Cameron should have done in the first place.
Even I'm now not convinced about. We have to have a super majority result, otherwise, as you say, it's going to carry on.
Let's just put to bed. Let's put to bed this: young people didn't vote. 65% of 25 to 38-year-olds voted. 36% of 18 to 20.
Vote.
You said they did.
I said they disproportionately voted to remain. That's what I said.
Okay. But
and they did disproportionately vote, which means, as this lot die and this lot get older, there's going to be a majority in this country for re-entry.
Well, that's
and actually, the moment Brexit happens. The moment Brexit happens and we've got all that, I suspect the campaign to rejoin will start almost immediately.
Let's underscore what Rachel just said and listen to Conservative John Penrose, who backed Remain, speaking in September 2016 about ignoring the view of the British people in the referendum.
Part of the backing for the Leave campaign was this cry of frustration at our democracy. And I can think of nothing more dangerous, nothing more corrosive, if we in this place say that we are not listening and we stick our fingers in our ears and refuse to honour the decisive decision, the decisive verdict which has been rendered unto us.
And June, bringing you into what Rachel said, and I respect the fact that you think Britain took a wrong turn, I absolutely get it, but that MP is right. It would be effectively an absolutely, to use his word, corrosive act, would it not?
Yeah, and I think the problem is Cameron made the mistake in not actually having some sort of threshold in the first place.
But we are what we are.
But what we're saying now is, aside from referendum, is really what we want to make sure is that the people decide on the terms of the deal.
Well, you want that. I don't know that everybody wants it.
What's interesting is that, remember, the original referendum on the EU, on being in the common market.
Oh, I genuinely couldn't vote in that, so I can't.
65%, I think, voted in favour.
Yeah.
And the argument, I mean, coming on the other side, the argument for change was that the EU changed, that the EU was not the same as the common market, and that we'd becoming part of something very different without ever having a referendum, and that was the argument for it. But I mean, I just honestly think this will never go away.
But Carol's is a good point. We'd have had to redo the Scottish referendum, Greg. Where would it... Because that was 55 plays 45?
45, yeah.
Yeah, but he wants a 60 plays 40. But this would never end,
can't
Greg.
retrospectively change a referendum.
No, but what I'm saying is under Greg's law, under Dyke's law, the Scottish referendum... I'm sorry, guys, you've got to do it again.
You've got to have... No, you've got to have a 60%, or like 55, but you've got to be... Whatever you think is... 52-48 is not... A
win is a win is a win. You're a sports bloke.
No,
a win is a win.
Not on an issue like this.
No,
not on an issue
setting
like
a
this.
threshold smacks of political cowardice. It really does. If you have a 60% thing on something, you don't need a referendum. Many people, the thing that upsets me, many people who voted in that referendum, it was the first time they thought their voices would be heard. It was the first time they thought they could make a difference. You know, no safe seats, no tactical voting. They wanted their voice to be heard, and it hasn't been, and that's been the tragedy.
And I am 100% certain we must move on. You're watching The Pledge on Sky News. Up next, find out who I'm branding the ultimate snowflake. There's something wonderfully reassuring about studying history, and it's probably down to this. It's all about facts and dates. Now, of course, there are endless interpretations as to why one country went to war with another or what actually caused a revolution, but no one can dispute the facts. That is, unless you are acclaimed TV historian Dan Snow, who actually got a first-class honours degree in history from Oxford, but was clearly off the day they studied World War II. When his 6-year-old daughter ran through a museum display celebrating the Spitfire aircraft, chanting, "Boy, boy, boy," concerning the pilots, Snow decided history needed rewriting and told her women had flown the aircraft in combat, defending this with some waffle about allowing her to follow her dreams. What happens the day she discovers the truth from a teacher or a friend? Why didn't he tell her that without women, many of the planes would neither have been built nor indeed delivered? Yeah. He might put the snow in snowflake, but you really wouldn't expect this don't know much about history attitude from him.
That was highly enjoyable. It was. I have some sympathy with Dan Snow, even though as an academic, even telly-historian, you rest on your reputation, and once you've broadcast that you've lied to your own daughter about something so stupid as that, you know, where do you come back from that? Yeah. But I might tell a quick story, because he wanted his daughter to see that women could have daring, exciting, adventurous lives, like the men who were in the cockpits of those Spitfires in the museum. And very quickly, when I was about 7, and my brother Boris was about 8, some family friend came and sort of patted us on the head and said, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And so I looked up at him and I said, "A wife and mother." And then he said, "And you, Alexander," because that was who his name was, "and what do you want to do when you grow up?" And he went, "World king." Oh, my God!
He's on his way. Jude, let's bring you in on this, because there is undoubtedly an argument, discussion to be had about how women had been held back and how women have advanced. And, you know, we might tell fibs about the tooth fairies and the Easter Bunny. Yeah. Not Father Christmas, because he is true. He does exist. He does exist, everybody.
Mother Christmas.
Indeed, of course, yeah. But you actually would have been better for the fellow to say, look, that was then. Look how women have come forward. Darling, you can become a pilot. Is that not the way to go forward?
Yeah, and you know, I know Dan very well, and I love Dan, and clearly, you know, he was well-intentioned and his heart was in the right place in terms of doing this, but I think as a historian, he actually should have looked into history a little bit more, because there are lots of amazing women who've done phenomenal things against all the odds. Why not tell your daughter about them? There are so many great women that he could have taught his daughter about without lying.
What he should have told them was that there was 166 women pilots in the war, but that's by the by. You know, he must surely know what women did. They kept this country going.
Yes.
They worked in the fields, they worked in factories, there were mechanics, there were electricians, they built, you rightly said, they built the place.
Yeah, they did.
And actually, before the war started, it's interesting, there were only 5 million women in this country who worked. By 1943, there were 7 million women working. And the tragic thing is, after the war, those numbers kind of went back. But they were the precursor to the feminist movement, because those women told their kids about what they did. And it's no coincidence that in the early 60s, the feminist movement started, and the biggest issue was gender inequality. That's what he should be telling his girls.
Greg, ever told any of your kids fibs?
Can't think of it. No, I don't think so.
What should Dan Snow have done?
Well, he should have... I mean, I feel a bit sorry for him, don't you? No. I mean, to have been caught out just on a throwaway line, you know, almost, to be caught out and to be then condemned by all of us, really. I think it was an unwise thing to do. But I think what you've got to try and do with your daughters is give them all the confidence you can.
Yeah.
That's the job of a parent now. Tell your daughters they can achieve.
You've got many great examples.
You've got sons and a daughter, if I'm right.
Two and two.
Have they got? Do you think in Britain today, or the world today, because I think one of your sons, are they all equally get ahead?
Well, my daughter tells a very funny story recently of going for a job, and she was being headhunted, and she wasn't sure she was going to take it, and they said to her, the guy said to her, you know, why don't you go and ask your dad what he thinks? And she said, you don't understand, my dad thinks I should have your job. And that's the thing.
That's
you want your
kids. Do you
kids.
think boys and girls are equal in the workplace now?
No. Definitely not. Definitely. All the data shows you that's not the case. Back to Rachel's point in terms of what little girls want to be when they grow up. So this is from a study which asked girls what they wanted to be, and if you look, the majority of girls, unfortunately, said artist, hairdresser, there's nurse, pop singer, yeah. Okay, if we look at that, and then let's look at what the boys said. Oh, my goodness. So we have army, policeman, scientist, gamer, mechanic.
While we're doing that, let's look at some of the jobs the women did in the 1940s.
Yeah.
Let's look at what they did. Here we go. By 1943, 80 to 90% of women were working in factories, on the land or in armed forces. There were 640,000 women in the armed forces. My man was one of them. Plus many more who flew unarmed aircraft. Away from these roles, more than 80,000 women joined the Women's Land Army and worked on the farmers' land girls. They endured really tough conditions and long hours in isolated rural outposts in order to prevent Britain from being starved out. That's the lesson.
That's what he should have spoken about, Rachel.
Should have spoken to his kids about.
I mean, it's wonderful to see that, you know, the war turned things around for women in the workplace, even though they went a bit backwards. But there are scientific journals that report that girls as young as 6, which is, I think, underlies Dan's comment,
she was 6, or is
think
6,
that there are girls' jobs and boys' jobs, and that they don't
have...
that
data shows.
That data shows.
But it's true, Rachel.
And then this goes right the way through the workplace. I mean, today's... this week's story is about how there are still only 27% of women on boards, and that men think if they've got one woman on a board, oh, you know, job done.
But isn't it better to prepare girls for that, to how to deal with that, rather than tell them a lie and say there is no gender problem?
I think they have to feel ambitious. They have to believe that the sky's the limit.
I want to bring Greg on this. We don't need to see all of what Mr. Snow said. This is how he ends it. I'm bringing her, my daughter, up in a way. She's hopefully seeing her gender as something that is not an obstacle to doing anything.
Good.
Yeah.
You think? Yeah, we all agree with that.
Yeah, the reality is it is.
I'm not sure.
Gender is not that barrier.
I'm not sure telling her that women flew Spitfires is a good way of doing that. Yeah. But I think the sentiment is right.
Yeah.
You've got to tell your kids. But what I suspect is still happening is this is happening in the middle classes and less so in less able homes. I don't think women are being... I don't think if you're coming off the average council estate, you are being told, like your brother, you can do anything.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely
Whereas I think in middle-class homes that has changed.
June? No. I totally disagree. I think, actually, in working-class homes, you're told you can do anything because you have to.
But why
because you can't afford to.
When life has shown them differently.
No, my point is, so in middle-class homes, you have the luxury of perhaps not working if you don't want to. Working-class women have had to work. My mum had to work her whole life because we couldn't afford not to.
But you can't believe the lie that women can do anything coming from that that environment because life has shown them they can't do anything, that there are limitations. They're taught to be grateful for what they have.
But they're not brought up to think that they're less than men. The idea is nobody can do well if you're from that sort of background, but everybody has to work.
I think a lot of women in working class communities
are. It really is.
I do think, I mean, just from my own experience of watching my daughters as they grow up, is I do think they suddenly become aware they're going for a career, they don't know, and then suddenly they realise in their 30s, hang on, what do I do? Do I now have kids or don't I? What do I do about it? And I don't think there's any doubt that if you start, as a woman, if you now say, oh, I'm going to have a couple of kids, you probably lose 3 or 4 years in your career, in the advancement of your career.
The Spitfire debate has landed. We move on. There have been some famous comebacks over the years. Liverpool in the European Cup in 2005. Peter Mandelson's return to government. Gary Barlow's journey from obscurity back to pop stardom. Even Greg Dyke got another job after the balls-up that was the FA. But this week may have trumped the lot. On Tuesday, it was reported that Russian journalist Arkady Babchenko had been assassinated in Kiev in a hit job ordered by the Russian state. But the next day, he turned up at a news conference. It turned out his murder had been staged by Ukraine's security services in an effort to expose Russian agents. Even his wife wasn't in on the plan. Now, rising from the dead may make him the Messiah. Not telling the missus may make him a very naughty boy. But either way, it's definitely enough to earn him our award for Comeback of the Week. Congratulations to him. Carol, you and I have been to a few press conferences down the years. Yeah. I've never seen the subject who suddenly walk out.
It would have been a surefire certain splash there. You wouldn't have had to think what to write, would you?
Did you see it on TV, Greg?
No, I didn't. I was away. But I just think, God, I wouldn't want to go home to talk to the wife.
Would you do something and not involve Mrs. Dyke?
Oh, you must be joking.
The upside is she didn't grieve for very long.
Yeah.
Well, she didn't. No, she probably was quite pleased to see. Logically, she'd be pleased to see him.
No way! You'd kill him. You literally would kill him. You'd be dead after.
Yeah. All right, June, we have to end it there because that's it for this week, and thank you for watching.